Looking at Vivaldi's Gloria in D, the author suggests that a good high school chorus and good high school orchestra would be able to perform this piece, and I absolutely think that is true. This would definitely not be something that I would choose for a beginner choir or a new program. The students need to have a good idea of sight reading, a good idea of rhythmic notation, and how to execute those well. Also, professional choirs and university choirs shouldn't limit themselves to things that are just extremely difficult. I think this would be really wonderful to be done at the university level or even beyond, just because it is a beautiful piece. And though it can be done by a really good high school choir, junior college, even the university level, I think that this is something that they should explore. We shouldn't look at things in regards of, oh, that's too easy, because it can always be performed and executed perfectly, or close to perfectly. Some of the pros and cons of this work is, as far as the pros, it is beautiful. It's full of chorus and orchestra parts. It has lovely solos. It would be a good work from this time period, from this Baroque time period. But also some cons is that, it is a Baroque orchestration, so you would need a basso continuo, which, they recommend a Baroque organ, but if that's not available, a harpsichord. So it's essentially just finding a harpsichordist. Again, this would not be feasible for a typical high school orchestra, so you would have to look elsewhere for those things. This could be costly. It's also interesting that you do have to do your homework on the Baroque time period, because you cannot let your singers, if you have a group of 60 or even more singing, you cannot let the singers overpower what the orchestration, what the strings, what the different things like that are doing. The authors make a very strong point that it should not feel like the orchestra is accompanying the chorus and the singers, that it should very much feel like equal parts and equally important, and that is a strong characteristic of the Baroque time period, and that should be honored when doing that. So that can be problematic, just given the need of, if you have a large chorus, needing a large orchestra as well, and just those Baroque instruments. So it also needs good soloists. Some of the solo parts are a little tricky and they're pretty extensive. So again, if this is a high school level, in the university level, those singers should be able to cover those solo parts. If it is a high school, you could think about hiring in soloists, or even taking the time to train those students properly if you have some really talented soloists. So those are just some cons, or just some things you need to work through. The four chorus sections that I was going to talk about was, the first one is the Gloria, which is the first one, the Gloria in Excelsis Deo. So some very important things that the authors address is that you really need to know your tempo, and you need to know exactly where this tempo needs to be. You can't allow the players or the singers or yourself, you cannot allow yourself to rush to the next downbeat. It can gain momentum easily, this movement can. So with inexperienced players, this can end up being a really rushed, and that can a really rushed execution, which can end up with a less than desirable execution. They also give the advice that they need to make sure that the choir and the orchestra maintain a sense of shape and direction through repetitive passages. So instead of just singing them all repetitively the same way, we need to look at the shaping, and you need that shaping to be the same within the chorus and the orchestra. So that the uniting of those two parts is very important. As far as the chorus part, the rhythms are pretty repetitive, and though this might be like a little bit rhythmically complex for a high school choir, once you get that rhythm in your body, and once you really figure out that rhythm, it's repetitive, and it's that same complicated section is repetitive throughout. The rhythms move together in this, so all voices are moving together. There's no polyphonic texture. There's There's no rhythmic texture in it. It's just pretty much all moving together. And the chordal harmonies are pretty straightforward. You know, they're lining up the harmonies, and they're lining up in pretty straight and straightforward chords. Normally in a seventh, you know, like almost like a do, mi, so. Anyways, the entrances are straightforward as well. They're usually coming in on the downbeat of 1 or the downbeat of 3. And in measures 41 through 48, there is some chromatic movement. So that is a section that would probably take the most time. Everything else would probably be able to be sight read. The next movement I'm going to talk about is the second one, the Et intera pax hominibus. So this one is a lot more difficult than the first movement. The choir singing at a slow, sustained pace, and there's some chromatic adjustments. But as the line evolves, it almost seems like there's no room for breath. So it's going to be a lot of sustained singing, a lot of quick breaths when you can. But this could actually affect tempo and intonation issues. So this is going to be one that's going to take a lot of time. The basses and the tenors begin with the bass line coming in, and then in the next measure the tenors come in, and then the alto and soprano line copy exactly what the basses did, about 2 measures behind. The soprano line is copying the tenor line, so they're singing the same notes, just an octave difference, and the same with the bass line and the alto line. So it's in direct repetition, almost in like a round-like fashion. It comes together around measure, but all voices come together around measure 31, and then in 37 through 38, there's a lot of chromatic movement and rhythmic complexity between the parts. Soprano and bass are moving together, and tenor and alto are moving together, but they are not moving the same as in the first movement. So this one is a little bit more difficult. The next movement that I'm going to talk about is number 5, the Propter Magnum Gloria. This is an allegro piece. It should not be rushed. It is rhythmically repetitive, and it isn't a round, but they're intervallically different. So they're not just singing the same thing. Like the bass will come in on a note and have but they're intervallically the same. So the tenors will come in on a different note, but it's still the same interval jumps. And there's also this like kind of motive here, or like a pattern. There's an eighth note pattern of about 12 to 13 eighth notes that each voice will do in their own. The intervals are the same, but they have separate notes. Okay. There is also significant chromaticism in measures 12 through 15. This was interesting advice from the authors. Since the instruments and voices are doubled part by part throughout the movement, you will want to edit breath marks into the strings. So the choral phrasing in the string section and the string phrasing, as well as orchestral phrasing, needs to be the same. So they're almost breathing together, so that the phrasing is the same throughout, because you don't want the string section to undermine what you're doing in the choral section. So the main subject, they also give the advice it should be detached, that hooking the dotted rhythm. And they said to kind of like let your sopranos sing this for your violins to reiterate the sound that you're wanting and the phrasing that you're wanting. So to almost let the strings sing it in the same way that the sopranos were. The next one I'm going to go over, my final movement I'm going to go over, is the 7th, number 7, the Domine Filii Unigenite. There is rhythmic complexity here. It's polyphonic movement. Each voice is singing its own line. There's chromatic movement, and it's mostly stepwise, but even the stepwise movement in a chromatic fashion can be difficult, just keeping that in tune, especially just moving up by a half step, moving down by a half step. Keeping that in tune really does take a trained choir and a choir with a good trained ear. The rhythms briefly unite towards the end. Beware of rushing. That's a major one. It's a brisk, lively 3 is how it should be conducted. And you have to keep you have to keep your orchestra and your singers very much going with your baton, because rushing can definitely occur in this piece. And as they gave the advice before, it will help your balance problems and save much rehearsal time if you edit breath marks and dynamics carefully into contrapuntal doubling. So when the orchestra is playing with the choir, singing, that they're all breathing together, they're all following the same dynamics, so that they'll be working together, not against each other. I believe that is answering all of the questions.